Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 480, and I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anslone. I got a lot of news to talk about in today's show, including the UN Security Council has authorized sending a U.S.-backed force into Haiti. So we'll be breaking that down. Also, all the news and updates on the war on Russia and the budget debate regarding providing funds to Ukraine. So be sure to share today's show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute. We repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com. You can find the show on YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version. It's up anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts. And you can follow me on Twitter at KyleAnslone_, on Instagram at KyleAnslone3, and I also have a Facebook where I try to post, most of the stuff that I'm doing with the show and all the articles that I'm writing at the Institute. So if you can, just hit the share button on any of my work that you see on the social media platforms and help me get it out there to more people. And with that, let me get into today's news. First up, we have Haiti. All right, I wrote this article for the Institute, but we did repost it over at antiwar.com. And just so, most of my listeners know, most of my work gets reposted at the Institute and antiwar.com. Sometimes just the links at antiwar.com, but sometimes Dave will just go ahead and reprint my articles as, news pieces on the antiwar.com website. So you could typically find everything I do at both sites. Here we go. UN Security Council authorizes sending U.S.-backed force into Haiti. The United Nations Security Council, that's the UNSC, voted in favor of a U.S.-sponsored resolution that authorizes a deployment of Kenyan-led troops to Haiti. The Washington-backed agreement in Port-au-Prince requested the mission after gangs captured large swaths of the capital city. The U.S. has pledged financial support and training for the international troops deployed to Haiti under the UN flag. During the meeting of the UNSC on Monday, the body approved the measure that gives Kenya the authority to send troops into Haiti aimed at restoring order. The measure calls for the troops to work with local police to plan and conduct joint security operations as it works to counter gangs and improve security conditions in Haiti. The force will help secure critical infrastructure sites and transit locations, such as the airports, ports, and key intersections, and that is all the language of the resolution. There's also a lot of stuff written within the resolution aimed at quelling concerns based on the human rights abuses of the last UN mission to Haiti. And so I mentioned this down at the bottom of the article, and it's certainly something that we have talked about over the past couple of weeks on the show. But particularly the last UN mission lasted from 2004 to 2017, and during that time, troops conducted rampant sexual rights abuses against women, including underage women, impregnating even underage women and leaving them, providing no support to those women. And then they also released wastewater into drinking water and caused a massive cholera outbreak that killed nearly 10,000 people. And so there is specific language in the new UN resolution that calls for the UN force to have to dispose of their wastewater properly. However, rather than this being a sign that, this time it's going to be better and this time it's actually going to work, this foreign occupation, this international occupation of Haiti is going to be effective because we told them that you can't dump sewage in drinking water. But in fact, I think this actually kind of proves that the opposite is true. If they really expect that you have to write all kinds of rules just on how to do basic things like not pollute the drinking water of the people that you're trying to help, then it shows that this international force just is never going to care enough about the civilian population to treat them properly. And so even if you're monitoring to make sure the wastewater is disposed of properly, who knows, they don't start doing US style like burn pits or something like that, burning trash near Haitian neighborhoods and, causing pollutants and, health issues that way, or any other way that, this military force can, just essentially plague the local population by, not doing basic things they should be doing, or let's say that, hey, we're really going to crack down and make sure there's not as many sexual human rights abuses against women, well then, what if there's a huge increase in theft and that they're just going in houses and stealing from the Haitian? All these things are probably going to happen, and just because you try to write more specific rules doesn't mean that the underlying issues of foreign military occupation aren't going to bubble up their ugly heads and still be an issue here. So if you listen, I spent probably an hour listening to basically all the countries on the UN Security Council kind of give their statements. China was more supportive of the mission, where I would say Russia was skeptical, but both of those nations voted to abstain. Both could have issued a veto and killed the measure. From the Chinese delegation, it didn't sound like that was really considered. From the Russian side, it sounded like it would have been something that was considered, but both nations said that because the government in Port-au-Prince that's currently led by Ariel Henry is requesting the aid, that they were not going to veto it and basically let it move forward. So that was most of the debate. There was also some discussion, and it seems like this was a part of the Biden administration's thinking, is that this was basically going to go better in Haiti than past UN missions, because they're sending African forces to a country where most of the people living there are descendants of Africa. Haiti is a nation that was kind of founded by rebelling slaves, and so almost all the people living on the island are black. And so I guess there's a thought that because the Kenyan soldiers are black as well, that this is going to somehow work better. Although if you look and you read some of the Kenyan media, they will point out that, hey, these people don't speak the same language. It's not that the troops are going to go into Haiti and they're going to speak, I guess, a variation of French or English. That's not what the Kenyan soldiers speak. And so, just because the skin tones are relatively the same doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to be viewed as an occupying force. And so I think that's a real miscalculation. Now, let's talk about Ariel Henry for a second here. He's the prime minister of Haiti. He rose to power with Washington support after the president, Jovenel Moïse, was assassinated. I believe that was July 7th, 2021. Since taking office, the streets of Port-au-Prince have become a battleground between rival gangs and vigilante groups of civilians frustrated with the rampant violence. And this is something that Brad Pierce points out in his fantastic article. I believe we ran that on antiwar.com in the viewpoints section on Tuesday, that the people have gotten so frustrated that now there's vigilantes on the street, which in a sense, I don't want to tell people that they don't have a right to self-defense and everything like that. At the same time, large groups of civilians carrying around machetes and engaging in some borderline mob justice, mob mentality, could certainly lead to innocent people being subject to that violence. And when it's being handed out in the streets by machetes, that's probably a death sentence. And so even if the vigilante groups are probably a improvement over the gang control, it's still not, a great situation for anyone. So Henry supports the U.S. mission, or the UN mission, but the Haitian people have protested against deploying the soldiers. Additionally, various Haitian groups have issued letters demanding the UN drop the plan to send the troops and for the White House to withdraw its support from Henry. But the White House has been committed to this plan for over a year now. Washington first hoped to enlist Ottawa to lead the mission, but the Canadian government rebuffed the U.S. When Kenya agreed to lead the mission, it seemed like they got a pretty good payoff from the U.S. The U.S. agreed to provide $100 million to aid the mission, and the U.S. will train the Kenyan soldiers as well as provide other information that needed, intelligence to run whatever kind of operations that they're going to run. Additionally, they got Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin to actually travel to Kenya. I believe he went to Nairobi and met with his Kenyan counterpart and signed a deal to increase military ties between the two nations over the next 5 years. There's also going to be other soldiers involved. I think it's going to be about 1,000 Kenyan soldiers, and they're reporting that the total size of the mission is going to be about 2,000. And so they're talking, I think, Jamaica, Barbados, and a couple other these Caribbean nations have agreed to send some of their soldiers to Haiti, but the U.S. says they're not sending any of theirs. Their soldiers, our soldiers, are only going to be involved in the training aspect, which I guess won't happen in Haiti. Details, still remain to be seen, but looks like the U.S. taxpayer is going to be on the hook for hundreds of millions of dollars here, because the U.S. is also saying, along with, providing financing to the Kenyan soldiers, we're also going to train and help support the local forces there, the Haitian police, restore order. And so we're giving them tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars as well. And this is, of course, only for the first year of this mission, so who knows how long it goes on. My guess is that this creates more instability in the Caribbean, not less. I think the Biden administration is doing this to curb immigration from Haiti. I think the Democrats put themselves in a really bad position on the immigration issue, where they ran so hard against Trump on the immigration issue. They condemned Trump so much that when they took office, they really embraced this narrative of everybody's welcome and everybody should come to the United States. Well, that's led to hundreds of thousands of people trying to enter the U.S. every month from the southern border, which, just if you look at what the U.S. government is capable of managing, that's far more. That's a far larger project than the U.S. government is capable of managing. And so now a lot of these people are ending up in really bad situations, either getting to the U.S. or at the U.S. border in U.S. custody and things like that. And so they're just deporting them back. They're putting the Haitians back on planes and flying them back to Haiti, which is, of course, an awful look when you called President Donald Trump a Nazi for his immigration policy, which in rhetoric was different, but in effect has largely been similar to Biden's. All right, so next up here, we have former Venezuelan coup plotter hired by Florida College to speak on defending democracy. A little bit of a fun article here. So we have Juan Guaido. He was hired by Florida International University, that's FIU, and that is apparently the third largest college in Florida, to give a series of talks and mentor students. Guaido launched a coup attempt in Venezuela in 2019, but failed to gain any significant support within the country. The former self-proclaimed president announced that he was joining FIU on Twitter. The Miami Herald reports Guaido will receive $40,000 for the fall semester and conduct 8 study group sessions, in addition to mentoring students, conducting research, and being a part of public conferences and seminars. And to me, this stinks a little bit. It seems like this is maybe a little bit of a payoff to Guaido. You have this guy who was a U.S., my guess, asset, intelligence asset, probably knows a little bit more than what he has publicly disclosed. And now that he is no longer running around Venezuela trying to, rally up coup attempts and overthrow Maduro, he's out of a job. And, the U.S. can't give him access to more of Venezuela's internationally held money. And so this is, I guess, I don't know. I kind of think it's basically a bribe to get the guy to keep his mouth shut. Now, Guaido thanked FIU for offering him a new stage and an opportunity to talk about the challenges of defending democracy, resisting dictatorship, and accompanying the most vulnerable. No, exactly. Accompanying the most vulnerable. I guess he probably means helping them there. This was a translation I got off of X, so that accompanying maybe not the greatest translation, I guess. So in 2019, Guaido attempted to invoke the Venezuelan constitution to overthrow President Nicolas Maduro. However, he was unable to gain any significant support among Venezuelans, and several attempts to rally the people against Maduro failed. Just to get into this a little bit more, when he initially declared himself president, he was the rotating head of this opposition legislative body, and he had only received a small portion of the vote. He was very unpopular within Venezuela. I think only like 3% of Venezuelans even knew who he was. And when he announced that he was going to, declare himself acting president of Venezuela in 2019, other members of the Venezuelan opposition actually walked off the stage in protest. And so, Guaido never had much support, even among the Venezuelan opposition, and certainly not among the general population. However, he was able to gain significant support on the international stage. The Donald Trump White House enthusiastically backed the coup plotters' claim to power and gave the Guaido administration access to Venezuela internationally held funds. While Guaido's government in exile was plagued with corruption, the Joe Biden administration continued his predecessor's attempt to remove Maduro from power and backed Guaido. In 2022, the Venezuelan opposition finally voted to terminate the Guaido government. And so, without any pretext of being the president within Venezuela, even the U.S. and the Washington had to admit that this had failed. So, Guaido's title at FIU is Senior Leadership Fellow at the Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom, and the center says it aims to promote economic and individual freedom and human prosperity. However, as self-proclaimed president, Guaido encouraged the U.S. to sanction Venezuela. The economic war against the South African nation has impoverished the Venezuelan people and contributed to tens of thousands of deaths. And so, just the whole point of him being a coup plotter and getting this job to defend democracy, that he's working at a center specifically, it would be one thing if he was in like the human or international relations department, but he's in this, economic center aimed at individual freedom and economic freedom, human prosperity. And he has been a human wrecking ball for the Venezuelan economy, encouraging outside intervention. Remember, Venezuela is one of the countries, along with Iran, Syria, North Korea, that were subject to Trump's maximum pressure sanctions campaign, which is, a total economic war designed to cripple these nations' economy. And what do you do when you destroy an economy that supports millions of people? You kill at least tens of thousands, if not more, the most vulnerable people. And so, well, he's being celebrated in the U.S. He's a real villain and murderer of his own people. All right, next up here we have all the drama around the House Speaker. This from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. The House on Tuesday voted to remove Representative Kevin McCarthy as Speaker, marking the first time in history a House Speaker was removed through a resolution to oust them. The effort was launched on Monday by Representative Matt Gaetz, who introduced a privilege resolution to vacate the speakership after McCarthy cut a secret deal with President Biden on Ukraine aid. Since a handful of Republicans supported Gaetz' maneuver, McCarthy needed some Democrats to support him to survive, but none did. The final vote was 216 to 210, with 8 Republicans and every Democrat voting to remove McCarthy. There's no clear nominee to replace McCarthy, but in the meantime, according to CNN, Representative Patrick McHenry, he's a Republican from North Carolina, will serve as the interim speaker. Gaetz has long been threatening to launch an effort to remove McCarthy. His decision to go through with the motion came in response to the stopgap funding bill that was passed by the House on Saturday and signed by President Biden to avert a government shutdown. The House stripped billions in Ukraine aid from the stopgap funding bill, but Gaetz said McCarthy must have cut a secret deal since Democrats supported it anyway. President Biden said Sunday that he expected McCarthy to keep his word and secure the passage of support for Ukraine at this critical moment. While the majority of Congress still supports the proxy war in Ukraine, the fact that staunch opponents of the of the policy like Gates have power over the House leadership is significant. Opposition to proxy war among Republicans in Congress is likely to continue to grow, as a CNN poll found 71% of Republican voters don't want more spending on the Ukraine war to be authorized. And so this is a little bit of what we talked about in the last show with the budget debate, where they separated the continuing resolution from the Ukraine aid. And while in the short term that made it so that the Ukraine aid, didn't get passed and the government was able to stay open, not that I necessarily want the government to stay open, but that, that's what Congress was aiming to do. It did create this problem that I identified, that it seems more likely that the Ukraine aid is going to get passed now, because tying it to the continuing resolution made it so that Republicans were also putting in other things that were issues for Democrats, right? And so the Democrats wouldn't vote for it that reason, but stripping that aside and just making an up and down vote on Ukraine aid, I think it'll be a lot easier to get bipartisan support for this in the House. And look, there are a minority of the Republican caucus that are opposed, and this is great, to this war spending, but it is nowhere near a majority of that caucus, and almost every Democrat is still on board with it. Next up here, and I think this is really big news, Britain has run out of military equipment to give Ukraine. The UK has run out of military equipment that it can give to Ukraine, according to a senior British military source speaking with The Telegraph. We've given away just about as much as we can afford, the unnamed source told the paper, adding that the UK had a role to play in encouraging other nations to continue arming Ukraine. We will continue to source equipment to provide for Ukraine, but what they've need now is things like air defense assets and artillery ammunition, and we've run dry on that. I also read that I believe it's Brower, he's a NATO official who told the weapons conference in Warsaw recently that NATO is now able to see the bottom of the barrel in arms supplies that they have to send to Ukraine. And he's speaking figuratively there, but basically what he's saying is, look, the weapons that Western nation have in their arms depots to send to Ukraine are nearly depleted. And so we will see what happens here, and what these Western countries decide to do as this gets more and more complicated. We've seen Washington try to say, take the conventional unitary 155 millimeter ATACMS missiles and say, we can't give these to Ukraine because we don't have enough of them in our own stockpiles to do that, but we do have 155 millimeter cluster munitions and cluster ATACMS, and we could send those to Ukraine because we're not going to use cluster munitions anyways, which of course presents a couple problems. One, it's illegal under U.S. law. Two, these weapons are not exactly what Ukraine is looking for. Cluster munitions are anti-personnel weapons, where our artillery rounds would be able to take out larger positions and things like that. And so I'm not quite sure how effective these artillery rounds are even going to be on the battlefield. I know they want to use the ATACMS to take out Russian military installations within Russian territory, and certainly that won't be quite so possible, if at all, with the ATACMS munitions. And then also the long-term consequences of sending cluster munitions, all the bomblets that are going to be left behind, and the years and years and billions of dollars in cleanup that the U.S. is adding to the bill by sending those weapons to Ukraine. All right, next up here, Biden tells allied leaders Ukraine aid cannot be interrupted under any circumstances. So President Joe Biden held a call with leaders of several allied nations to stress that weapon shipments to Ukraine cannot end for any reason. Some members of the NATO alliance recently expressed an unwillingness or inability to provide further arms to Kiev. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby stated that Biden spoke with the leaders of Canada, Italy, Japan, the UK, Poland, Romania, Germany, the European Commission, the European Council, and NATO on Tuesday. Kirby said the president expressed that we cannot under any circumstances allow America's support for Ukraine to be uninterrupted. Time is not our friend. Biden added that he was confident that Congress would authorize a $24 billion aid bill that the White House has requested. While a majority of representatives in both houses of Congress continue to support aiding Ukraine, a recent poll shows that 71% of Republicans and 55% of Americans overall do not want to pass another multi-billion-dollar bill to support Kiev. A press release from UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said that London was committed to supporting Kiev. This was a press release that was issued, talking about the call that Sunak had with Biden and the other leaders. It stated that he outlined the UK's ongoing military, humanitarian, and economic assistance for Ukraine and stressed that this support will continue for as long as it takes. Biden also apparently used that phrase, as long as it takes. However, and as I mentioned before, the Telegraph reported that London has depleted its available stockpile of weapons that it could ship to Kiev. And so I'm not sure if Sunak is lying or if, this is kind of what they were saying in the Telegraph article, that the UK now sees its role as pushing allies to send weapons to Ukraine, not necessarily that it could continue to send weapons to Ukraine themselves. Now, we also have the fact that after Ukrainian President Zelensky criticized Poland during his United Nations General Assembly speech, tension between Kiev and Warsaw boiled over, with the Polish Prime Minister announcing that arms shipments to Ukraine would end. Additionally, on Monday, the Slovak Social Democracy Party, running on a platform of ending arms transfers to Ukraine, won a plurality in the country's legislature. The party leader, Robert Fico, doubled down on his pledge after Monday's election victory, saying that, Slovakia was done providing weapons to Ukraine and that they were just going to focus on their own needs. Washington has also struggled to transfer Kiev the weapons the Ukrainian military needs. The White House resorted to sending Ukraine cluster variants of 155mm shells and long-range rockets because the Department of Defense lacked enough conventional munitions to transfer to Kiev. And so, we have Biden making this call, but it seems like there may be real panic and red flags going up in the West about, they've committed to Ukraine that they're going to do this for as long as it takes, but it's seeming like logistically, as long as it takes may only be another few months as far as what the West could actually do for Ukraine. I think the major concern here is that rather than allowing the aid to end, the West is going to try to get more and more creative with what they're sending to Ukraine, and by doing so, send them more advanced, longer range weapons because, that's what they'll find they have surpluses of as, they deplete their stockpiles of other shorter range weapons that they've been comfortable giving Ukraine during this time. All right, so this from Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com. Pentagon tells Congress it's running out of money to replace weapons sent to Ukraine. The Pentagon has warned Congress that it's running out of money to replace stockpiles of weapons that they have sent to Ukraine, and it has been forced to slow down the replenishment of the U.S. military. The warning comes as Congress passed a short-term funding bill to avert a government shutdown that did not include money to continue fueling the proxy war in Ukraine. According to the Associated Press, the Pentagon comptroller told the House and Senate leaders that the U.S. military has 1.6 left of the 25.9 billion Congress has authorized to replace weapons that have been poured into Ukraine. He said in a letter, we have already been forced to slow down the replenishment of our own forces to hedge against uncertain funding future. Failures to replenish military services on a timely basis could harm our military readiness. The Pentagon also has $5.2 billion remain in the Presidential Drawdown Authority Fund, which allows Biden to ship weapons directly to Ukraine from U.S. military stockpiles. That $5.4 billion is what's left of the $6.2 billion that became unavailable after the Pentagon claimed an accounting error that overvalued the arms sent to Ukraine that freed up more money to spend on fueling the war. And I really want to raise some questions now about that $6.2 billion, because my understanding is the way the Presidential Drawdown Authority funds are supposed to work is this. Congress gives Biden, say, $6 billion or $10 billion. The $10 billion, better number there. $10 billion. Congress says, all right, President, you had $10 billion in Presidential Drawdown Authority funds that you could send to Ukraine. That means that Biden can take $10 billion of U.S. weapons that exist in U.S. stockpiles and send those weapons to Ukraine. Now, what that $10 billion is actually for, my understanding, is replacing the weapons. And so if the comptroller is saying that they've had to slow down that process, they only have $1.6 billion left in that fund, but they still have $5.4 billion left in the other fund, and they've already spent about an additional $8 billion of what they are supposed to spend from the accounting error. It kind of sounds to me, and I'm kind of suspicious that accounting error was all fictitious, and really they've now put themselves in a position where they're sending more arms to Ukraine than they have money to replace those arms, and that's kind of the predicament that the Pentagon has now found itself in. But that is, me kind of breaking down this story to a level that necessarily hasn't been disclosed yet. So, and Dave also notes in this article that the comptroller said the Pentagon is completely out of funds for the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, which is what the Pentagon uses to buy weapons on behalf of Ukraine. Now, my guess is that a lot of those weapons that they have bought through the USAI have not actually reached Ukraine, right? Because this is, they're saying that, hey, they'll go to Lockheed Martin. Hey, we have, $2 billion here. We want to buy some HIMARS for Ukraine. And Lockheed says, great, we're going to start making those. Well, it takes months, years to make these systems, put them together, and then get them to Ukraine. And so just because, the USAI funds are, I think, considered most of the time to be longer term things for Ukraine. So I would, I'm not saying that weapon shipments are going to stop anytime soon. Over years from the USAI funds, Ukraine is going to continue to receive weapons. All right, next up here. Russia expects U.S. to continue Ukraine support despite lack of funding in aid bill. And look, this is more or less what I've been kind of pointing out, that it seems a little bit better that we moved in the right direction a little bit as far as what's happened in Congress opposing the White House sending more aid to Ukraine. At the same time, if you look at the accounting error, if you look at how the White House is talking about this, it really doesn't seem like they're planning on stopping sending weapons to Ukraine, I guess, unless they completely run out of weapons, maybe. And so if it's just a money, if it's just a financing thing, my guess is that the White House is going to find some kind of tricky political maneuver to just bypass whatever's left of the Constitution and congressional war authorities and continue to, arm and fund Ukraine anyways. So next up here, the White House says the next weapons package is coming soon. This is from the White House press secretary spokeswoman. There is a very strong international coalition behind Ukraine, and Putin thinks he could outlast us. He's wrong. And so we will have another package of aid for Ukraine soon to signal our continued support for the brave people of Ukraine. The last package was September 21st, so it's not like there's been a particularly long time between aid packages. Lately, it seems to me they've been trying to announce them later in the week, Thursday or Friday, I think, to maybe downplay them in the news cycle, although the last one was announced when Zelensky was in Washington, so I think that was actually on Thursday, but I would expect that maybe Friday we get the announcement of this aid package. And look, the White House press secretary, well, she's just a propagandist, right? Like, her job is to spin for the White House. I get it. And so, people are always outraged at what a liar, whoever the press secretary is. But, the idea that the White House thinks that they're going to outlast Russia here, when we're getting the reports we're getting from NATO, the UK, and other countries saying, like, hey, our weapons stockpiles are being depleted. Poland is turning off the spigot. Slovakia is turning off the spigot. There's a lot of issues here that suggest that the Western optimism about we're going to outlast Russia and support Ukraine for as long as it takes really isn't going to come through here. All right. We also have the U.S. government saying they're running out of money to provide Ukraine with other financial aid. So this is not weapons aid. This is just other forms of aid. And again, it's unclear to me how much that if they do run out of money, they really would have to shut it off and not just repurpose money from other areas of the government. A lot of this money, if you look at kind of the situation in Kiev, seems to be going to a lot of corrupt purposes. And these are even things that the United States government says that they're concerned about, is the rampant corruption within Ukraine. And in fact, and I know this is coming from CNN and Natasha Bertrand, who is definitely maybe not an intelligence asset, but she sure acts like one. And she reported that the U.S. was threatening to shut off some aid to Ukraine over the corruption. And I don't think that's going to happen. I think she's saying it because the American people need to believe that the White House is doing something about Ukrainian corruption. But the fact that it has gotten so bad that they even have to issue that statement, through their proxy in the media there, is kind of interesting. So I'm going to keep an eye on this and see how the financial aid unfolds. All right, last up article here I wrote for the Institute. Qatar offers to hold talks between Russia and Ukraine. Qatari official said that Doha could potentially host diplomats from Russia and Ukraine for negotiations aimed at ending the war. Qatar recently played a role in brokering the release of American prisoners in Iran. In an interview with Newsweek, a Qatari diplomat said that Doha could play a role in ending the war in Ukraine. He said, if as to mediate in the Ukraine conflict, we would of course be ready to work towards facilitating dialogue and achieving peace in Europe. This is desperately needed. In fact, Qatar supports any kind of constructive dialogue and negotiations that could lead to an end of the conflict, as has been our position from the beginning. We continue to call on an immediate cessation of military action in Ukraine. And so, there have been potential for talks, and those talks have been killed by the U.S., even though those talks were brokered by NATO ally Turkey, the United Nations, and then the other round of talks brokered by Israel, a very firm U.S. partner. Still, Washington, as we see, is just unwilling to allow this war to end. And in part, I think we understand now that it's because Ukraine won't retake all of its territory. And so if the war ends without Ukraine taking all of its territory, given the standards that was set by Washington, that would be considered a loss. And they have also declared that if Ukraine loses, China will invade Taiwan. And so now they all believe that they can't allow Ukraine to lose this war, or else it will mean that China will invade Taiwan, which I think the whole logic of the whole thing is stupid and ridiculous. But if you listen to, Matt's Boot and the rest of the Washington consensus, Matt's Boot was just the latest, but, this has come from Lindsey Graham and everyone, the foreign policy establishment within Washington. They're very clear that this has a lot to do with China and not so much to do with the Ukrainian people, actually. Another piece of evidence of that is, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have died in this war, and Western officials keep saying, oh, we can Russia at really low cost. So ridiculous. All right, everybody, that's the end of the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be back with more shows later in the week.